Hey everyone, this is Sebastian and welcome to the second lesson of this film history class on YouTube. Today's lesson is about early cinema, and the main question we'll be asking ourselves is when does it all begin? Where can we start this timeline? Which might seem like a very simple question, right? But if you followed the last lesson, you might already understand why it's not as simple as that. Because establishing a year or a date is not sufficient to really know where an art form begins. So instead of giving you a predetermined list of events and inventors, what I'll do is that I'll try to show you as much as I can, and then you'll be able to make up your mind on this subject matter. So for instance, there's a very popular approach when it comes to film history, which consists on approaching film history as a continuation of inventions, of technical inventions. So in this timeline, we have Leonardo da Vinci, who imagines the camera obscura, which is a very important concept for photography in general, right? Then we have Nicéphore Niepce, who is this French inventor who comes up with this technique called a heliography, which basically allows him to take the first picture ever, which, if you ask me, is pretty cool and pretty important. Then we have some other guys like Etienne Jules Marais, who publishes La Machine Animale, in which he tries to determine if horses put all their 4 feet on the ground at the same time while they're galloping or not. This simple question results in a feud between a bunch of inventors who try to determine if that's true or not. Do horses really put their 4 feet at the same time on the ground while they're galloping? And the way to determine this is by deconstructing movement, right? Because then you'll see in detail how the horse moves. And to do this, the best way is to grab a camera and take pictures of a horse moving. So because of this, a bunch of inventions having to do with photography get made. Eventually, Edison's kinetoscope is invented, and 4 years later, the frères Lumière come up with le cinématographe. So that's the timeline we get if we approach film history in a very technical manner. There are many other ways that you can use to determine where film begins. For instance, on the text version of this lesson, I talked about Plato's cavern and the whole idea of mimesis, which is basically representing ourselves through art. So maybe there are principles which are not even that close to us time-wise that could be used as an argument to determine where film begins, and maybe not even film itself as an invention, but film as an idea, right? Because before there was even an invention, there was the idea of representing ourselves. And maybe film is the form, the shape that this desire takes, which is of course a desire related to the human condition, right? To see ourselves. And you can already see how abstract this approach is. So I won't get too much into it. I'll let you read it by yourself on the text version of this class. If you want to discuss it, you can join the subreddit and I'll be happy to discuss it with you. But for now, I really want to establish a common ground on how film history begins. So for now, let's just watch 3 short movies by some early filmmakers. These are some very, very short films, so you might have to watch them twice to really understand what are the differences between them. Alright, so let's watch this. Alright, so before we go any further, I just wanted to say that the sound that I put on these films is not very accurate because it's a 24 frame per second machine sound, and two of these films, that's not the right frame rate for them. This is just a little detail, but I wanted to let you know that that's not how it would sound like. Alright, so what can be said about these three films, right? I mean, they seem very similar. For instance, they're all filmed with only one point of view and one shot. So the camera operator, all he did is he started recording and he just stayed there for the whole film, right? It's just one shot. That's what these three films have in common. And all of the very primitive films have this style. A static point of view on the tripod, a camera that doesn't move, that just films the action. The second thing they have in common is the very short nature of the action, right? They're very short films, which in a way show how limited the format was at the time. But also, you should notice that all these films are like a demonstration of a very short and basic action. The first one shows you three guys working. The second one is two guys fighting. The third one actually has a story, right? So you can see how it's almost like a more advanced film compared to the two other ones. But for now, let's just concentrate on the first one, which is by Edison. So Edison was one of the great American inventors and businessmen. We usually know him as the inventor of the light bulb. He invented a thing called a phonograph, which was a machine for sound. So inventing the phonograph wasn't enough for him, right? So he wanted a phonograph for the eye. That's why he called it. So he invented two machines. One machine called the kinetoscope and the other one called the kinetograph. The difference between them is that the kinetoscope is an exhibition device and the kinetograph is a filming device. And now that we've seen his film, how can we say that that is not cinema, right? Why do we put Edison before this timeline? Why do we say that he isn't the inventor of cinema, but it's the Lumière brothers who invented it? The thing is that his machine is very limited compared to the Lumière brothers. You cannot project the film. So how it worked is that only one person at the time could see the films. His exhibition device was a little box that had a hole, and you would put your eye on it and you would see the film. And in a way, that's very different from what film is. And that comes to show how the history of film is not only a technical one, right? It's almost like a social one. Cinema, to be cinema, has to be that activity where people go into a room in the dark and watch a movie together, right? That sounds kind of weird, but that's really what it is. And that's a funny thought, right? Because now with Netflix and all these other streaming programs and websites, it's almost like it's going against that idea of cinema. So maybe the way we were studying cinema is going to change with all these new exhibition ways. Maybe we will talk about cinema in another way in like 10 or 20 years. That's another topic, right? But it's still very interesting to see how we constructed history based on this criteria, and now history itself is destroying this criteria that was defining cinema. So right, let's just say for now that Edison he comes really before cinema because he didn't manage to create an invention that would join that criteria. He wasn't able to project his movies, and let's just say that cinema is all about that. I think there's a room for a disagreement there, but that's really how history is told in academia. I kind of disagree because of what I said about Netflix and DVDs and VHS and stuff like that. There's still cinema for me. So yeah, let's just assume that cinema needs a projection device to be cinema, to be the art form that we're talking about. What about Sklodowski? What about Max Sklodowski? He invented this thing called a bioscope, which in Greek means to see live. So he invented this, and he projected some films like Kangaroo Boxer and the film I just showed you 2 months before the Lumière brothers. So this guy, he had a machine that could film and a way to project films just like Lumière. And the truth is, we barely talk about them, like we barely mention them. These two brothers, they just seem like a trivial part of cinema when we're telling its history. They're like this little fact. Oh, did you also know that there were like two German inventors that had a similar invention to the Lumière brothers? Oh, you do? Oh, well, let's just forget about them and talk about the Lumière brothers. And there are many reasons for this. One might be, and this is really my personal theory, it's because of the way history is written, and some of the things Germany has done throughout history puts them in a very bad position, so we don't want to have them as the inventors of something as important for modernity. But that's really just a little opinion that I have on it. So just forget I even mentioned that. There are some actual reasons why they're not considered the grandfathers of cinema. And they're mostly technical. It's really about the technical limitations of their invention. The movies could only last about 10 seconds, and to be projected, 2 film strips needed to be projected in a very demanding synchronicity. So it wasn't as simple and as easy to project their films. It was like a prototype of the cinematograph. And for the titles of the films, they needed a lanterna obscura, They had some huge technical problems that makes this machine like the announcement of what's to come. And I know the technical argument saying that this machine is not sufficient to be the canonical invention for film history seems like a very poor argument, and I would agree, really. But that's how history is constructed by academia, right? That's how it's studied in universities. That's what I'm trying to do, right? I'm trying to show you how it's studied, but I'm also trying to question it. So it's really a matter of opinion. I don't know if they're actually the inventors of cinema, but I think there's a value to the doubt that they're imposing on us. They show how history is not only facts, it's also questions. And if you want to know more about these two guys, there's a film by the German director Wim Wenders. I haven't seen it, but I hear it's very, very interesting. So now that we've established what comes before cinema, we can really get to the Lumière brothers, right, who are known as the inventors of cinema. So what you should know is that these two guys, they're in a context of excitement. There's a bunch of inventions being made. Like there's planes that are getting made, hot dogs. Believe it or not, the hot dog was made then. Iced tea, I think it was made back then too. I think it's the powder version of it. Also, like right when their invention came out, so there were a lot of inventors making the same inventions. They weren't communicating. There was no way to communicate between them. So they were all getting to the same conclusions and making the same discoveries at the same time. So for instance, there's the cinematograph, there is actograph, American biograph, biactograph. The list goes on, but it's really the cinematograph that we remember. And why? One of the reasons is that the Lumière brothers exported their machine faster and more efficiently. They had these camera operators that they would send around the world, and they would go places and film there and show the films. So they had a body of work that was way more important than any other inventor. So in a way, they're announcing the industry part of film, right? So we have the art, we have like how it comes from photography and it's an art. We also have the invention, like the technical invention, but there's also the need for an industry for film to develop as an art form in a way. You can't separate the art part from the industry part. So in a way, maybe that's one of the reasons we consider them to be the starting point of this history. They had a very smart business model. They would not sell their machine to anyone. Instead, they would lend it to these operators and have the monopoly on film production and distribution. Additionally, technical superiority of the format, its frame rate, and how it was relatively portable really contributed to its success, right? There's also a mythical importance to this machine. There's a myth that surrounds it. I mean, the myth of its invention, it's a really crazy one, right? It's like Auguste, he couldn't sleep one night, and he just came up with the idea, and he invented it in one night. So he invented this machine in one night, right? Like, that's incredible, right? I mean, I don't think that's true, but that story contributes to this. But that story really contributes to to the magnificence of this machine, right? It was made by a genius, and he had like this vision, just like an artist. It was something that was meant to be, and that's how the story is told. So the very important event related to the Lumière brothers is the first paid projection at the Grand Café. It's very important that it was a paid projection, because that shows the exhibition model that will develop later. So I guess all these characteristics made the cinematograph and this projection very important for the rest of film history. And what's funny is that only 33 people were there during the first night. And in a very short amount of time, over 2,000 people wanted to get in. Like, people were fighting to get into the movies, right? To see like what this was all about. And what's very important to know is that at this first projection at Le Grand Café, there was a guy, a magician, whose name is Georges Méliès. What is usually told in film history is that the Lumière brothers, they were documentary filmmakers, because they would film life itself, and that the first fiction filmmaker, like the storyteller and filmmaker that would use visual effects, is Georges Méliès. And you might know him because of Voyage dans la Lune, which is a very interesting film because it has like all these effects, and there's this long story, and it has like a very long form compared to what was done at the time. I think separating Méliès from Lumière and saying that one is fiction and one is documentary, it's a way to understand the different trends of film, but it's not completely true, because the Lumière brothers, they made some films that had some visual effects, and Georges Méliès made some more naturalistic films too. So the distinction is good to learn film history, but it's not that in sync with what actually happened. So Méliès was very popular from 1902 to 1906. After a while, people started getting tired of fantasy, of all these magic tricks. What they wanted was more dramatic and realistic films, and maybe even comedies, right? And it doesn't take very long before some filmmakers start to notice that you can use more than one point of view when you want to tell a story, right? So people get bored of him, and and they just forget about him after a while. This is depicted in Hugo, the film by Scorsese, and while the film is decent, it's really interesting to see how the film tells that story of him just being forgotten by people because they don't care about his films anymore. So let's just watch a very short film by him called Un homme de tête. so that's a very impressive film when we think about it, because it was made in 1898, and this guy already understood all the proprieties of film, of how two similar frames create movement and how you can cut in between shots and add a foreign object to the next frame and create this effect of appearing objects, disappearing objects. But he also understood superposition, which is putting one image over the other and creating a new image, right? And even though these effects get old really quickly, most of the very fundamental techniques of film effects are already there after just like 3 or 4 years of the invention of the cinematograph. And what's funny is that the first time he saw the cinematograph, he wasn't impressed, because all he saw was a static image on the wall, and he was like, they invited me here to see pictures. I've been doing that for a while now. And then when the image started moving, that's when in his magician mind, he went like, this is a machine that I could use for my tricks. And without even being aware of it, because he was forgotten very quickly, and I don't think he was aware of his potential historical importance, he became a very important figure of cinema, right? Voyage dans la Lune is iconic, right? You see that moon with the little spaceship on its eye, and you know what it is, even if you haven't seen the movie. And that just comes to show how important he was, right? And keep in mind that what I just said about Lumière and Méliès is just really the tip of the iceberg, There are so many other things to know about them. They're very rich figures for film history, and they're also very, very important. So even if we try to question their role, it's important to know that they're still very important, and you can't go around them when you tell film history. It's impossible to do so. So now that we've seen some of the important figures, I want to talk to you about a figure that isn't as well known, that is actually put apart, almost forgotten. And it's funny because she might be the first real filmmaker, She's very important in a feminist approach of film history, so we've only started studying her recently. And when I say recently, I mean maybe 30 years. And her name is Alice Guy Blanchet. She was a Gaumont secretary, right? And one day she asked Monsieur Gaumont if she could try and make a film with her friends. And Gaumont said, yeah, you can do it if you want, as long as it doesn't interfere with your job, right? As long as you can do the paperwork and all that. So she accepted, and from 1896 to 1906, she made over 200 films. 200 films, that's really, really a lot, And when you check the Lumière brothers repertoire, you'll see that they have more films than her, but keep in mind that they had a lot of operators around the world, so they didn't film that many films by themselves. But she really did. She did over 200 films, and in total she oversaw the production of more or less 700 movies. And you can easily say that most of the early Gaumont films are hers. And some scholars say that she might have made some movies before 1896 without getting credit for it. So if that's true, and since she made films with her friends who were also actors, and she wrote storylines for them, that would mean that she was the first filmmaker ever to tell stories with the film medium. So that really means that she is the first filmmaker ever. That gives us a very new perspective on film history, right? Maybe all of this is true, and we only set her apart because she's a woman, and film history has this very masculine thing to it. Even today, how many woman filmmakers can you name? There are not that many compared to how many men there are. Most film directors are men, right? And even if she only started making films after 1896 and let's say that she's not the first filmmaker, she is still very important and very interesting. I'm gonna show you a little movie by her called La Fée aux Choux that she made in 1896. I think it's her first movie, or what is believed to be, and you'll see in this movie that she really grasped something about the potential of film, of what could be done with it. Like, she doesn't only film reality, she creates a new one. She's really creating her own reality, and you'll see that there's a very deep aesthetic sense to her approach. So let's watch it. Alright, so I hope you liked it, and that's about it for today. So obviously, if you enjoyed it, subscribe, like it, share it, all those things. But that's only if you really liked it. But since you did, you can go ahead and click right now. So I'll leave you with a little quote by Henri Langlois, the co-founder of the Cinematheque. And yeah, I'll see you next lesson. And I could see today that you weren't taking any notes. And I don't have to remind you that all this is in the exam, right?
La grande chose des films Lumière, c'est que ce n'est pas l'histoire qui l'a montré, c'est la vie.